very inaccessible and frankly very intimidating. And it's for good reason. I think numbers hurt that. I think people in finance like to try to intimidate other people. And I see people in my classroom who are intimidated, and I see people from finance who are trying to intimidate them. And I think what I've learned over the years is that finance is fundamentally very accessible and very intuitive. And you just have to disabuse yourself of that idea that you can't do these things. You know, my favorite example of this relates to my father, who spent his career in the pharmaceutical industry and fundamentally on the marketing side never touched finance and loved it. He really believed in the pharmaceutical industry, and he loved the process of selling and marketing life-saving drugs. In his late 50s, he began a second career, and he became an equity research analyst. And it was wonderful to see that transformation. He was hired because he had deep knowledge about drugs and the approval process and what drugs would be successful. But he had to marry that with financial knowledge to make predictions about stocks. And what was wonderful to see is how he approached it almost like a child and just wanting to learn. And, you know, we would have long conversations talking about finance, and it was wonderful. He would ask me questions, you know, simple questions like, you know, what is goodwill? And we would talk about it for a long time. He would ask, you know, how do you think about whether R&D is productive? And is that a good investment? You know, questions that he had kind of seen from the inside, but never thought about from a financial perspective. And he grew enormously during that time. And of course, he had all the knowledge he needed. He just needed the confidence and time to invest in the material. And ultimately, he became a very successful equity research analyst because he put aside that fear and he put aside that sense of, I don't think I can do this, which I see in so many people in my classroom. And he was able to conquer that. And that, I think, is the combination that I wish for many people, which is take your specific domain knowledge, take your functional expertise outside of finance, marry that with an open mind to finance, and you will find a world that will reward you, a world of ideas that will reward you. But you have to invest, and you have to actually be courageous to get over that fear. But ultimately, that combination that I saw in my father and I see in my students is, I think, really a rewarding one, and one that can propel you in your career beyond specific silos into the real fundamental role of a general manager.
The business headlines are full of stories about once promising companies that simply ran out of cash. Despite innovative products and compelling service offerings, they fell into a common trap: sudden success, rapid expansion, and then total disaster. I saw this happen many times in my years as a strategy consultant and executive, and now, as an adjunct professor and author, it's something I warn students about. A surprising number of business failures are not the result of a lack of good ideas, loyal customers, or talented employees. They're often simply due to ineffective cash management. Successful companies avoid this unsustainable growth trap by focusing on 4 fundamentals. First, understand how operating costs and working capital requirements change as your business grows. Rapid growth stresses margins as you try to keep your customers happy with things like faster fulfillment, a broader product mix, or more generous payment terms. Even when your borrowing costs are low, you cannot underestimate your day-to-day cash needs. As a cautionary tale, I often point to a theme restaurant that had a splashy New York opening in the early 90s. Initial sales were strong, and the company expanded aggressively, adding 50 more venues that generated over $300 million in annual sales in a short period of time. But that wasn't enough to outpace the accumulating debt. Within 3 years, the chain declared bankruptcy. Second, once you have anticipated your cash requirements, you need to carefully prioritize your cash use and take steps to reduce your working capital requirements. This might mean purchasing on consignment, offering customer discounts for prepayment, testing suppliers' terms, adjusting production to better match demand cycles, or offloading buffer inventory. Any number of steps can be taken to improve the working capital situation. Reinforcing a company culture focused on active cash management is critical to the effort. Third, don't obsess over values on your income statement because they're not the only index of your firm's health. Your balance sheet and cash flow statement are just as important. So look beyond the top line at 3 or more metrics such as cash on hand, accounts receivables, inventory levels, and new orders. The mistake that 90s theme restaurant made was opening bigger, fancier restaurants that would pull in higher sales, but also required much more capital to operate. The healthiest companies are profitable ones with good cash flow, not necessarily those with the most impressive income statements. Fourth, don't be afraid to take action based on what your metrics are telling you, even if it means upsetting some of your customers. Payment terms that push your accounts receivables balance too high need to be reined back in. Remember, making every customer happy is not the objective. Sustainable growth is. Sometimes letting a customer go is the right answer. Cash is king. Don't give it away. Financial health is about profit and cash generation, not market share. If you focus on these 4 fundamentals, you'll be better positioned for long-term success.
What I'd like to do today is talk about some critical skills that every manager should have as it relates to understanding finance and accounting. Let's go over them. First, accounting is adding and subtracting and dividing. Now, I do a lot of finance and accounting training, and a lot of times the engineers I work with and some of the technical people, they're a little disappointed. They say, is the math really that simple? Most of the time it is. Second, accounting has a lot of jargon and acronyms in it. One of the ways we can make it seem confusing and sophisticated is by using a lot of different terms, acronyms, and jargon for the same thing. For example, we call the primary statement in accounting the income statement. It's also called the statement of operations. Sometimes we call it a P&L or a profit and loss statement or an earnings statement. So you can come into a meeting and have the accounting people say, hey, I'm really worried about our income statement this last quarter. If our P&L doesn't look any better, management's going to be very concerned when we report it to the statement of operations. And what they said is the same thing 3 different ways. That can be kind of confusing. Third, there's always estimates and assumptions in a statement. It turns out that the data never fits perfectly in a neat little box. And so we always have to make estimates and assumptions to complete a statement for a quarter, for a month, or a year. And finally, related to that same topic, when you see those estimates and assumptions, you should get involved in the numbers. You should ask questions about the assumptions, especially on cost centers that you might manage, because you might have a better way of allocating or making those estimates than the accounting group does. And a good financial analyst will appreciate operating people who get involved in their reports, because our goal is to make accurate indications of whether we're profitable or not. And the better we make those estimates and assumptions, the more accurate the actual statement will be. I hope you can take this information and use it to become a better manager, because one of the key things that we all need to be able to do in business is understand how to read the financial statement.
For business people today, the basic way they communicate with each other is through finance. They communicate how they're performing, what they're asking for from each other, through financial statements and financial ratios. And the reason for that is, without those, it's very difficult to specify goals and for people to understand what they want from each other. My name is Mihir Desai. I'm a professor of finance at Harvard Business School. Finance has become the language of business. If you do not have analysis to back up your assertions, it is very difficult to be successful inside a business. and it is very difficult to convince people of their point of view. If you want to get approval for a major expansion, you need to demonstrate that it's value creating for your company. If you need to explain how you've been doing, if you want to think about incentive compensation or bonus performance evaluation, you need to be able to say, look at the cash flow I generated. It's critical that a manager understand that finance is not intimidating. There are many people out there who will use finance to intimidate you by using jargon and by making you feel kind of stupid. So they'll say things like WACC, NPV, ROIC, hedge funds, derivatives, warrants, convertible debentures, EBIT. The way to think about that is first to have the confidence to know that these materials are knowable and doable. Second is to ask a lot of questions. My goal when I walk into a classroom is to make you into somebody who understands that finance is completely intuitive.
I'll be your guide to the wonderful world of finance, and it's a wonderful world, despite what you might believe right now.
We don't want to live in a world where people are making decisions based on hunches. We actually have a set of tools, and increasingly they're financial tools, to make these decisions. As you progress, no matter what field you're in, operations, marketing, any field, you're going to be interacting with people, and you're going to have to make your case in financial terms. And if you can't make your case in financial terms, or you're intimidated, you're going to have a very hard time mobilizing the resources you need. If you emerge from this with the confidence to know that everything in finance is fundamentally knowable and doable and not intimidating, I think that's hugely successful.
I started working at Sara Lee when I was 35 years old. It was a chance to really understand the international business, and I had done some work in that realm, but my job was to really help the president with his growth of his business. There was a separate department, the M&A, Mergers and Acquisition Department, that would find the deal and analyze the deal and make the first approach and letter of intent. So I found very early in my time at Sara Lee that the M&A department had done analysis to buy a company in Tampere, Finland, the second largest city in Finland. And my boss, the president, said, I'm going to have to deliver the results as projected. Blythe, go lead the due diligence team and find out what's going on over there. So I went over to Tampere, and clearly Sara Lee management wanted to get this deal done. But I started looking around, first in the manufacturing plant, then in the warehouse, and I noticed this company made knit products and nylons, pantyhose, and T-shirts, and I noticed all this dust on the pantyhose. Now, this was in June, and I thought, why is this inventory so old? The big season had just gone through, the winter season. We're about to approach summer. Well, I started talking with the CEO. We had some lovely conversations back and forth, and I wanted to learn about the culture. And he told me just a few months earlier, the Finnish government had stopped guaranteeing receivables from Russia, his major market. And so he was no longer going to be able to sell as much as he had in the past because he couldn't collect. Well, this was huge, and this totally changed the revenue projections of the company. I realized this was a problem. I wrote a 10-point memo, which I sent to the president, explaining why I thought we should not do the deal. I started thinking, what would be a deal breaker here? And I explained to him I would not do the deal at all. And he said, well, we're committed already, so let's find a third rail, and that was buying a minority interest. The losses happened as we had projected after seeing on the ground what was going on and understanding more what the company was facing. So we had a lower risk by taking a minority interest, and we were able to adjust our expectations, and the president was able to better deliver what he could and also what was promised to the shareholders. One other addendum to this story is that about 4 months later, I ran into the chairman of Sara Lee, John Bryan. And he approached me at the elevator and he said, "Blythe, I just want you to know, it took a lot of courage to do what you did." And I felt so on cloud nine, hearing that I had done the right thing.